Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the mean girls of Morgantown. Today we're going to be talking about the tragic life of Skylar Neese. Our story today takes place in Morgantown, West Virginia. Now Morgantown, for those who don't know, really sits on the Monongahela River, which is a very large river that stretches over 130 miles, stretching between Central and West Virginia, and stretches all the way through to Pennsylvania, mostly Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Other than the Monongahela River, Morgantown, West Virginia would be known for another strange occurrence, and that would be light pillars that can be found not only in Morgantown but also West Virginia and other states that go through the Appalachians. It seems to be a very large attraction for people to come and see when visiting the Appalachians, but it should also be noted that it is a very rare occurrence to see such one of these things. Another thing that Morgantown, West Virginia would be well known for is, of course, its university, as that is where the University of West Virginia actually resides. And this also comes into play why Morgantown, West Virginia is so populated. In fact, a census would be done on Morgantown in 2020, and it is said to be the home of over 130,000 people, making Morgantown, West Virginia one of the third top most populated areas in West Virginia. And because it has such a large population, Morgantown has been a very growing metropolis that over the course of the last few years has actually installed malls, museums, and other things to just kind of bring in more tourist attractions. Unfortunately, Morgantown, West Virginia would also be well known for another incident that happened within that town. And that, unfortunately, is the topic of today's story, the tragedy of 16-year-old Skylar Neese. Skylar Annette Ness was born on February 10th, 1996 in Morgantown, West Virginia. And Skylar would be born to parents, both Dave and Mary Ness, and it is said that Skylar would be the only child they would have. Dave and Mary Ness would also go and say that it should go without saying that Skylar was completely spoiled rotten. Other than saying that they had both had spoiled their daughter, they would also say that she was incredibly intelligent, extremely bubbly, and just a very kind and loving person. And they would also say that she was also very fiercely loyal. Dave Ness would also make the statement that at times Skylar could be very hilarious, and would recall an incident that happened between him and his daughter when she was just a little girl. Dave would say on one of these particular days would be a day that Mary was actually at work, and the ever dutiful father, Dave, would have the responsibility of looking after their daughter. And on this particular day, Skylar would come out into the room and ask her father to join her for one of her infamous tea parties that she normally had, and would say that she would come out here completely decked out in a complete pink tutu. And the ever dutiful father, Dave, would say, "Of course, I would love to come to one of your tea parties." Dave would even say that he would go into her room and she would have everything all prepared for this tea party, and would notice that she had even had water inside of her little teacup. And little Skylar would come sit down on her chair, and the big burly father Dave would, arrange to sit down in this little tiny chair, and she would pour him a cup of her tea, and he would take a sip of it, and he would be like, "Oh honey, it tastes so amazing, you did such a good job brewing this tea." And he would say that Skylar was just completely blushing with happiness, and she was just so proud of herself that she could make her father happy for her tea. Later on that evening, when Mary would return home from work, Dave would tell Mary about the day he had with Skylar, and he would tell her about this tea party and would say how proud she was, and would even say that she even poured her own water for her tea kettle, which Mary would turn around and say that at that time, Skylar was too tiny to even bring the tea kettle up to the faucet. And it wasn't until then they realized that she had actually filled the tea kettle with the water from the toilet. Now let's fast forward to the day of July 5th, 2012, where Dave and Mary Ness would be sitting in their living room waiting for their daughter to return home from work, and they would be watching an episode of CSI, which was something that the Nesses typically done on an afternoon and was just kind of like their family bonding time. Skylar, who was now 16, was coming home from a shift that she was working at the fast food franchise Wendy's. It said that Skylar would return home, and after returning home, she would just go directly back to the back room where her bedroom was, and she would close the door and get out of her work clothes that she had been in all evening, and she would put in her night clothes and would take her work clothes out to the laundry room for her mother to wash in the morning. Now, Dave and Mary would ask Skylar if she wanted to stay up with them and watch an episode of CSI, but Skylar would tell both of her parents that she was really tired, and she would kiss them both and tell them that she loved them and would walk back to the same back room and shut the door. Now, the following morning on July 6, 2012, Dave would actually wake up as he had to work in the morning, the same with Mary. And Mary and Dave would wake up and they would walk past the back room and begin fixing breakfast and do their normal morning routine before work. And as they were walking out of the door, they thought about waking up Skylar, but they had figured it was a late night and she was already tired from her previous night of working and would just let her sleep in. Now, around 2 p.m., Dave would actually return from his job, and he would come home, and when he came home, he said that the house was completely quiet, and he knew that Mary was still at work, and he had noticed that the back door that was Skylar's bedroom was still shut, and he had figured to himself, okay, it's getting way too late for Skylar to still be asleep, and he would look around. She didn't seem to be anywhere, so he would walk back to the back door, and he would begin knocking on the door, but there would be no answer. And after a few more times of knocking, he would start calling out to his daughter, and when she didn't answer any of his calls, he would actually slowly open the door and find that the room was completely empty. He would start thinking back and think if Skylar had to be somewhere during that day, and he realized that she hadn't mentioned anything about being anywhere, so he would start trying to retrace his steps. Dave would then pull out his cell phone and begin phoning up his daughter, but unfortunately he wasn't getting an answer, and most of the phone calls to his daughter was going straight to voicemail. Dave would quickly call his wife, who was still at work, and he would tell her, listen, I can't seem to find our daughter and she's not home, and every time I call, she doesn't seem to be answering. And Mary would just tell Dave, well, let's just try to calm down and try to call some of her friends. Maybe they know where she's at. So Dave would get off the phone and he would quickly call their known daughter's best friend, which would be a girl named Sheila Eddy. Sheila Eddy would be, however, the girl in this middle picture up here. And he would quickly call her to where she would answer. And he would say, listen, I'm trying to get a hold of Skylar and I can't seem to find her anywhere. Do you know where she is? And Sheila would say, no, I have no idea where Skylar is. And Dave would quickly tell Sheila that they're looking for, and if you hear anything, just let us know, keep us updated, and if you do get a hold of her, just tell her to give us a call and let us know what's going on. Sheila would also let Dave know that she had in fact talked to Skylar that night around midnight, but the conversation didn't go anywhere other than just typically normal day-to-day stuff that teenagers mostly talk about, more or less about school, work, and so on. So Dave would take a quick breath after getting off the phone and just try to take a look around Skylar's room to see if he could figure out some clues. And he would begin looking around her room, and upon walking past her closet, he would notice something that was just completely off. He had noticed that her mesh screen that normally stayed hung to the outside of the window was actually sitting inside of her closet. And so he would walk past the closet over to this little bedroom window and notice the window had a gap small enough that you could fit your little fingers in to lift it up. And he would lift up the window and peek his whole half body out of the door and would be looking around trying to figure out why the screen was not there. And he would get his answer when he would look directly down and see that the bench that's set to Skylar's vanity was sitting right underneath of this window. but this would raise more questions than answers.